All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have some of my guests today, Dr. Craig Heacock. Craig, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right. So Dr. Heacock is an adolescent adult psychiatrist and addiction specialist in Fort Collins, Colorado. He's the host and co-producer of the psychiatric podcast, Back from the Abyss, a place for stories of hope and healing, recovery, and redemption. Dr. Heacock is a co-therapist in the phase 3 trial of MDMA-Assisted Psychotherapy for PTSD and has particular interest in the use of ketamine and other psychedelics to treat severe mood disorders and PTSD. Craig, welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, I've been really excited about this. Thank you.
All right. So before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you're calling from now, and then we can dive in.
I grew up on the western slope of Colorado in Grand Junction, Colorado. And right now I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado. And there's probably 4 inches of snow on the ground looking out my window. It's beautiful.
Nice. All right. So, as we kind of talk a little bit about before we started recording here, my goal on this podcast is basically just to kind of squeeze as much inspiration out of you as I can. So let's talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, how you got to where you are right now. Give us a nutshell, and then specifically the interest in PTSD and so forth. And then I'd love to get into the podcast and so forth. But let's start there if we could.
Yeah, I think I came into trauma late because I was drawn to psychiatry in my late 20s. I was just fascinated with mental illness and psychopharmacology. I was actually a volunteer in the 1996 trials of DMT at UNM, where human volunteers were injected with DMT, and it was the first human psychedelic experiments in 20 years. And I remember telling Dr. Strassman at that time, he said, "Oh, you're going to medical school. What do you want to do?" I said, "I definitely want to be a psychiatrist. I'd love to work with psychedelics." He said, "Well, that's going to be a long time. Good luck." But as I got into psychiatry, it's almost like I was an arborist who was drawn by the beauty of trees and leaves, and like, I want to work in trees. But the more I worked in psychiatry, I thought, oh wait, it's the roots. It's the root systems. And I started to think of trauma as the tap roots and the root systems of my patients, that I was drawn to the sort of the initial complexity and beauty of their stories and their overt suffering. But as you dig deep, I think like arborists know, it's all about the roots. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, I think I became very interested because I think of my own sort of vicarious traumas. As I've talked about on the podcast, Back from the Abyss, I've had multiple suicides. I've had 8 suicides, 2 of my patients murdered, and it's taken a huge toll. I thought as I moved along in my career, it would get easier, but I call it the trauma tale. I feel like therapists and docs, we carry the pain of all the things gone bad. And while I feel wiser and battle hardened, I also feel like I carry around this, as other therapists, I carry around this huge trauma tale, and it's getting bigger. And part of the inspiration with the podcast was to put hope out into the world, but it was also for me, it was to try to fill up my loss and just, and all of these people I lost, especially my 3rd suicide, which tore me to pieces. And so really, I think a number of people have asked me, how are you going to monetize the podcast? And I said, it is paying me back every day. It's filling my heart up. It's helping to heal my trauma as a therapist. It's bringing in people to talk about their trauma. It pays me back every day. It feels like a gift to me, and I hope to the world.
When you, I want to get into the podcast, but I want to go back to something you said earlier, which was kind of initially you were drawn to mental illness. Talk a little bit about that. How did that come about? Yeah,
I, maybe like a lot of husbands, I used to give my wife presents that I wanted. So when I was 28, I gave my wife Peter Kramer's Listening to Prozac. But really, I wanted to read it. Now, I don't even know why I wanted to read it. I had zero interest. I'd never taken a psychology class in college. I fancied myself growing up to be like an evolutionary biologist or something. But she didn't read it, but I read it. And it just busted my mind open about this idea of what is a self and what is a person and what is a personality, and how is it that a molecule can change the way we perceive ourselves in the world. And so I quit my job and I took an $8 an hour job at a psych hospital working the night shift as a tech. And I called my
So
mom.
this was before medical school?
Yeah, I called my
Okay.
mom. I said, I got to be a psychiatrist. And she said, oh, I
Wow.
always thought, my mom's a therapist. She said, oh, I always thought you'd be a psychiatrist. I said, why didn't you say something? She said, you needed to find it yourself.
Wow.
So really, it came from this book. Yeah, and I met Peter Kramer when I was at Brown, and I thanked him. I said, your book changed the course of my life.
Wow.
I had literally never thought about psychology or mental illness until I read that book at age 28.
So you obviously go through medical school, you do your residency. Are you at that point, are you like, I'm going to be a psychiatrist?
Yeah. I went to med school to be a psychiatrist, which I think is a little bit like joining the football team to be the punter, because you get a lot of pushback. People are like, what? Yeah. You want to be a psychiatrist? Why? Right. I mean, it was actually a lot of harassment. I felt like it took a lot of emotional fortitude because of all the negative comments I got from, especially attendings. You know, they were often very negative about psychiatry, mental health. Mm-hmm. So yeah, one time I was in surgery and this liver was bleeding all over, and the attending looked at me. He's like, is this anything like psychoanalysis? I said, are you going to beat up on me this whole rotation about psychiatry? He's like, Jesus, we need some good psychiatrists. He's like, so go for it, man. So then I kept retracting fat while he bovied the liver. So no, I went the day I stepped into medical school. I thought psychiatry or nothing.
Okay. So you go through that process and residency and so forth, and talk a little bit about the emerging of your appreciation for, or maybe this was there from the get-go, but the stories and the individuals, the roots, as you talked about.
Yeah. I really think it had to do with, in my residency, we had to do 3 years of psychodynamic therapy, follow 3 patients for 3 years, an hour a week. And I first thought, what are we going to talk about for 3 years? And it just burst my mind open, in that the more you get to know people, the more you see we are all complete mysteries to ourselves and to each other. And that forced, 3 patients for 3 years, an hour a week. That was the greatest gift of residency. And I went to residency interested in therapy. I left residency completely enamored with therapy. I love psychotherapy. I do a lot of it. But I think that was it, that 3 years of psychodynamic work with people, that it forced us to get to know people in a way that I'd really never known anyone.
So talk a little bit about how your appreciation for the mystery and with regards to psychodynamic therapy, because I think a lot of our listeners, though they might be aware of psychodynamic therapy, might not be aware of what it is specifically, what that looks like on the ground, if you will.
Yeah. I guess there's a lot of ways to approach that idea. The way I think of it is that when we come into the room with someone, we are really bringing the relationship templates, the objects, if you will. That is the nature of the self. Like, I am my mom and me wired into me, my dad and me wired into me, and a few other key features. And everything that I bring into the room to interact with someone is really these relationship interpersonal templates that I may or may not be aware of. And I experience the person nearly, especially after some initial time, I experience them nearly completely with my prior, objects or relationship templates, which as a therapist is utterly fascinating. And that's one of the things I talked about in episode 3 of my podcast, why it's so hard to be a good therapist, is because to be a really good therapist, you have to be running all these programs. And one of the programs, I would argue, is the psychodynamic program, which is which of my core relationship dynamics objects are getting activated and pulled and pushed. What are we co-creating in the room? Which of my key dynamics are we replaying a trauma? And then as the patient, through projective identification, having me reenact some key trauma that I'm not even realizing. I remember when I first learned about countertransference sadism, I thought, what? Like therapists can be sadists. And then I realized, I've done it many times, but one time, in a fit of countertransference sadism, I just stopped someone's Klonopin, and person had a grand mal seizure.
Wow.
And it was only afterwards, and when I was doing supervision on that, the supervisor said, "So why did you just stop 3 milligrams of Klonopin?" And I said, and she said, "That sounds like a sadistic act." And I thought, oh, yeah. I was totally playing out the countertransference sadism,
Oh,
which
jeez.
again, when I learned about that, I thought, what? I'm going to
Right.
help people. I'm going to help people. But, that happens a lot. And I think that's one of the fascinating things about psychodynamic work is, man, even when you know yourself, you think you know yourself deeply, that stuff comes up and it manifests and your buttons get pushed and parts of you get pulled out in the room that you don't even recognize.
Right.
So it's so rich and complex.
So at what point um, did you start the podcast, and why did you start the podcast specifically?
Yeah, I started back from the abyss this spring. Well, I started thinking about it in the spring for two reasons. One is one of my patients, actually a couple of my patients had been saying, I want to tell my story. I want to share it with the world. And actually, some of you may have guessed that that person, the inspiration for the podcast is the woman in episode 1. And we obscured the relationship with me because I wanted the very first episode to go out into the world as her story. Now, many people who've listened to it have said, she's talking about you. I said, yeah, but she has such a beautiful healing story. So part of it is I wanted people to hear that even if you have terrible trauma, terrible mental illness, there's hope. And then I have to, as I said a few minutes ago, I also did it for me because I feel like I carry around so much pain. And sometimes I've thought, I don't know if I can do this anymore. It's so hard. It's so sad.
You said you carry or you carried?
I still carry it, but I think like the podcast, like I've listened to episode 1 probably 30 times. I sob every time I hear it. I sob out of joy. I sob out of just like the beauty of it and the pain of it. And so I feel like I carry less helping people tell these stories and putting the podcast out there, but I still carry it. And it doesn't, as you can tell, I'm starting to get teary. If I start talking about my suicides too much, like it's just under the surface, but it's not wrecking me like it was. I mean, there were some years where I thought, I can't go on. This is too much sadness and loss. Whereas now I know I can do this. And again, helping people put out stories of healing, and that fills me up too. And it kind of unburdens me, and it gives me the energy to push forward and to remind myself, because I'm sure all the therapists listening, what do we focus on? We focus on the people that aren't going well, the failures. When I see patients, when I'm biking home after work, I think, oh, at 2:00 today, what was I thinking?
Mm-hmm.
But we forget to remind ourselves that there's great beauty, and that a lot of our patients are kicking ass, and they're doing the hard work of therapy, and they're sticking in there. And so it's a reminder to patients out there and to therapists and to me to, like, you know what? People do get better. It's not all pain.
You talked before about almost the stigma that kind of comes with wanting to be a psychiatrist. And I would imagine, what is it like to be a psychiatrist within the kind of framework of, or even maybe hierarchy might be a word, of physicians in a sense? And what is within that context, what does it mean to take care of yourself as you're doing this type of work? Is that something, I guess I'm kind of drawing an analogy here, or wondering if there is an analogy between yourself as a physician, as a psychiatrist, and people in the military. There's a big stigma about admitting trauma.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, for all the crap I caught in med school about wanting to be a psychiatrist, I mean, my interactions with the medical community now are 99% positive, because there's so much mental health stuff that spills into every specialty, and most other specialties don't have the time or wherewithal. And so mostly I get great gratitude from my physician colleagues in other specialties. And that's really cool, because going to med school to be the punter, I thought, I don't know, I hope I punt it well. But no, that's been lovely. And when I get calls from docs, ER docs, family practice docs, pediatricians, they are 99% very collaborative and grateful. And yeah, it's cool. I feel very appreciated now as a psychiatrist, in a way that med school suggested that being a psychiatrist was going to be like being put out in right field. But I feel much more central now. And I have to say, I see a lot of physicians, and I love treating therapists and physicians, because I feel like when you help a therapist, you help a physician, you help a bunch of people. And I mean, doctors are the worst patients for sure. I mean, when I've been a patient, I was the worst. I'm sure my therapist wanted to boot me a number of times. But yeah, it's deeply gratifying to work with physicians. It's taken a couple of years off my life, but I enjoy it.
So the podcast is Back from the Abyss, and you started last spring. Okay.
Yes.
And go ahead.
We started the planning, started recording in June. And we're trying to do 2 a month, which is tricky because my sound guy has a full-time job. I have a full-time job plus. I have lots of interests, but this is my love interest right now. My wife has said recently, she said, "You're having an affair with your podcast." She said, literally, like, all you want to do is slip away and edit. Because it's true, for hours I'm editing, and my wife's like, "Are you done editing?" "No, I got to hear it again." But it's a total labor of love. It's given so much already.
So these stories of healing, these stories of hope, talk more about that. What are you I mean, I guess my question is, like, what are you hoping to put into these podcasts? I mean, is it just simply stories of hope and healing? And talk more about that.
Yeah, I guess a few themes that have come up in the first 10 or 11 episodes, and I don't think this was necessarily my goal at the beginning, but it's turned out to be a key piece, is I really find myself wanting to feature stories that are long and hard struggle, because I have lots of stories where we, you hit a home run in 2 visits, or, like my EMDR story, I did 2 sessions at EMDR and it really healed me. But I want people to hear that there is great value in sticking in there with your therapist or your doc when times get hard, and that you might get worse before you get better. That this is a marathon, that so much of psychiatric treatment is a marathon. And I love that, because I love the long-term relationships with people and getting to know people. But I think a lot of people out there don't realize, I mean, I've had people come see me once or twice, like, "Is that it? Do I need to see you again?" I'm like, actually, yeah, because you were hospitalized with mania last month and psychosis. And yeah, we actually need to keep seeing each other. This is a long-term thing. So that's a big part of it. I love therapy, and I'm going to be shifting the podcast more to have people tell their therapy stories, which is actually shockingly hard to find, because even very eloquent, intelligent, insightful people, I find, have a lot of trouble describing why therapy helped them. I mean, and I think that's one of the things that's so fascinating about psychotherapy, is those of us who are in it, we know it is such a powerful healing tool. But what is the special sauce? I mean, it's the relationship, it's the trust, it's the time. But when you actually sit down with someone and say, "Wait, how did you heal from your anorexia? How you're 6 years?" And a lot of people struggle to tell that. And so that's one of the things I want to do in upcoming episodes, is really try to find stories where people can put that into words, what that looked like for them, that psychotherapy healing path.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, as you were saying that, I was thinking about my own experience, my own process, and what that would be like. and I think that would be very powerful. I just want to remind everyone that I'm speaking with Dr. Craig Heacock. He's an adolescent adult psychiatrist and addiction specialist in Fort Collins, Colorado, and his podcast is Back from the Abyss. What do you think, Craig, it is about you that uh, allows you to do this work, that makes you that is unique in a sense? What's your special sauce in a sense?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is I'm a 7 on the Enneagram. I'm an enthusiast. Like, I'm all in, and I think people hear that and they see that when they come see me. Like, for better or worse, like, I'm jumping in full bore with you. And our strengths are our weaknesses. Being a 7 has gotten me into some serious trouble in my life, but yeah, I am. I'm probably delusionally optimistic, and I think that's helped me work with a lot of the people I've worked, because we work with really hard, awful pain. I mean, many of my medical colleagues say, like my 2 best friends from medical school say, I can't imagine you do the work you do. Now, like, granted, one of my best friends is a hospice doc. The other one is a trauma surgeon. And this is them saying, I can't imagine working in mental illness. But I'm the same way, like, oh, I don't want to do trauma surgery or work with hospice. So, I think we all hopefully find the pain that we can handle
Mm-hmm.
and the pain that speaks to us. I also think I'm so genuine. That's got me in trouble too. I do not have a poker face. I just lay it all out there, and I'm very honest to a fault. And I tell people, like, look, I'm going to tell you how it is, and if that's hurtful, please tell me. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
trying to be hurtful. I'm just like, yeah, I'm a big wave of genuineness, which again, not everybody can handle.
Right.
I see sometimes people, I say, I don't think I'm right for you. I think I'm going to be too much. I think you need, I think you need to find someone who's like a little bit more like human Klonopin, who can sort of hold you for a month and just like sit with you. Cause that's not me. Yeah.
But I'm thinking to myself, I mean, all those qualities really resonate with people who've been impacted by trauma, right? I mean, a lot of them, their safety's been violated, and to have someone there who's all in, who's genuine. I mean, for me, those qualities really resonate, and I think they're just so palpable. I love it, and I can see that from you too. I can
Yeah.
feel that from you too.
I also think I had a psychotherapy supervisor, Brown, who's actually a very famous psychiatrist, tell me, you should never use humor. This work is very too serious. And I remember thinking, okay, that's not going to work for me, because I'm a goofball. And again, that doesn't connect with everyone, but some of my most traumatized patients, horrific sexual trauma, whatever, that's often where we finally bond. Like, once they see that I'm there for them, we send each other funny memes, and we joke around, and we bond through humor. And
Now, were you always like that in your role as a psychiatrist?
no, I think I've evolved. I think, yeah, in the early years, I've been much humbled. Yeah, I've been I think in the early years I was delusional about my ability to help people, rescue people. I think that's sort of narcissistic healer thing, like, oh yeah, I can help the world. And then after all those losses and my own journey of horror, I realized, you know what, I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to come to the table and give what I got, and I hope that's enough. And more people are going to die. I mean, I know I'm going to lose more patients. And remember,
Mm-hmm.
one of my attendings at Brown said, look, if you don't want to have suicides, then you can't work with really sick people. He said, if you want to work with really sick people, you're going to have suicides. And I remember thinking, well, I want to work with sick people. Okay. But I didn't really get that until, well, really it was the 3rd suicide. And then the last couple, I've realized I've handled them much better. They're deeply sad, but they didn't completely waylay me. And also, I don't dread the next one. I know it's coming. I'm crossing it, but I'm not I'm not delusional that, like, if I work hard enough, I'm going to save everybody, which I think
Mm-hmm.
I just know that all I can do is just try to give what I got, and realize that, some people are terminal. I
Right.
mean, some people are psychiatrically terminal, which is a weird concept, but it's true. Like, some people are going to die. And I think when we work in the trenches like this, if you don't accept that, very bad things are going to happen. And that's what, that's where I was spinning out into just panic and despair and substance abuse and just, falling apart, because I just thought, I can't keep everybody safe. I can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
And now just like, I don't have to keep everybody safe. I can just try to care about them and give them the best I got, and just hope it goes well, but know that for some people it won't. And that's actually a huge burden lifted off me, to realize, okay, more people are going to die. And it's a weird thought, but to really accept that, but I do. It's just like, this is hard work. This is really hard work. And I chose this, I chose to be the punter. I could have been a lineman, but I would have hated it. I had to be the punter.
When you experienced those first suicides, how did you handle it? What was going through your mind? What did you do?
Yeah, I think by the third one, which I've talked about on the podcast some, I'm going to talk more about it. I went into 24/7 panic. I just thought, I have to work hard. I worked longer hours. I checked the obituaries obsessively. I called any of my patients that I was worried about continually. I started abusing substances. I couldn't sleep. I'm drinking too much. I kind of gotten this, I guess like an Enneagram 7 would, like, maybe if I just go more all in, like maybe if I just burn that fire even hotter. But no, what I needed to do was back off, take a big breath, and like take a huge hit of humility, and just have some compassion for myself and not take myself so seriously. And I lived in 24/7 panic for a long time. And it was only when that went away I realized that I was a wreck. But when stuff, it's amazing what we can live with. Like when it just becomes your norm, we see that, all of us see that in our work. Someone comes into your office, you think, how are you living like this? Well, if it happens steadily, slowly over time, the temperature just gets turned up on the frog and it doesn't jump out of the pot. And I think each of my successive suicides was the water turning up. And then the third one, I should have jumped out of the pot, but I was like, no, like nothing can make me jump out. I'm just going to sit in here and sizzle and just let it burn. I can take whatever that you got. And it was bad.
So this obviously had an impact on you personally, how you responded to it professionally. And I'm thinking about, our listeners here, a lot of whom are just starting out on their kind of trauma-informed journey. They're people who have a lot of experience, but there seems to be a lesson, a gold nugget in what you're talking about right now for the listeners. What would you say that is?
Yeah, I would say in some ways it's going to get easier. As a therapist, your pattern recognition improves. You have more life experience. You've seen more patients. You've made more mistakes. But in some ways it's going to get a lot harder, because you're going to, if you care, like if you really care and connect with people, you are going to carry all of that in you. And how do you handle that? You have to find a way, and I think it's different for each of us, but you have to find a way to not carry all that burden of the trauma tale. And I worry a lot about, for example, listeners of this podcast are largely trauma therapists. I mean, not everybody I see has trauma. I see a lot of trauma, but I often think, oh, how do trauma therapists see trauma all day? Because I see people who don't have trauma, and when I do, I think, when I have a new evaluation, I ask people about trauma and they don't really have any. I often will high five them. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, really? That's so awesome. Or fist bump them, like, damn, that's so good. I'm so happy to think that not everybody was sexually assaulted. Like, oh, I know, because as a man working in mental health and just hearing all the horrible things that men have done, it's a heavy load. And so I guess that's the main thing, to know that it's going to get harder, but it's going to get easier. And for the hard part, you need to seek out people to talk about this. And it's okay to just take one big deep breath of humility. Like you don't have to, you're not going to save everyone. You're not going to help everyone, but you're going to help a lot of people. And bad things are going to happen. Bad things are going to happen. It's just accept it. I mean, I accept that now. And it's been such a burden lifted off me, because I just used to live in 24/7 dread of what the next coroner's report was going to be, or who was going to kill themselves next, or, you know, it was destroying me.
I really appreciate your candidness in describing and talking about your own experience with this topic. I mean, this subject. I mean, I think you've done it in a way that very few people would. So I just want to thank you for doing that.
You're most welcome.
Yeah. So Craig, as we close out here, I want to get a couple of book recommendations, but before we do, just again, talking with Dr. Craig Heacock, his podcast is Back from the Abyss. Check that out. So in terms of any book recommendations, whether trauma related or not, or whatever, anything that's been inspiring you that you want to share with us?
Yeah. One of the most important books I've read in the last few years, I actually finished it a couple of years ago, is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And I think it won the National Book Award, and it is an unbelievable book. And some of the listeners will be familiar with it. It's definitely a book that I could only read like 4 or 5 pages at a time, because it's so dense with such mind. It's all, I don't know if you are familiar with the book, but it's based on it's based on this idea that has come out of the cognitive psychology research, that we really have 2 mental systems. We have the fast system and the slow system, thus thinking fast and slow. And the fast system is what Malcolm Gladwell called the blink, the gut, the pattern recognition, the quick, like friend, foe, we're good. The slow is like 25 times 7 plus 9 minus 2, or could you discuss the Obama presidency in detail for the next 15 minutes and compare and contrast it with the Eisenhower presidency? But to summarize this incredibly profound book is that the vast majority of time that we think that we're thinking, we're not. We're reacting. The 99.9% of things we do, even extremely important things that we do in our work and life, we are not thinking. We are using blink, fast-acting pattern recognition. And the more that we recognize when we're not thinking, then we can actually shift to our thinking mode, which is hard. And I could talk about this book for 2 hours, but if you haven't read Thinking Fast and Slow and you're interested in the mind, you have to read it. But it will probably take a few months to read that book.
Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I'll have that listed here at the show notes page at thetraumatherapistpodcast.com. Craig, man, I want to thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And again, you know, having someone like you on and experiencing your openness and honesty is what this is about for me. So again, thank you so much for doing it.
Yeah, this was really great. Thank you so much. Thanks, God.
All right.